Hello everyone.
About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did.
I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Story 1. I signed up for the reality show thinking it would be one of those typical survival-style competitions. The pitch was simple enough: survive a series of simulated emergencies in exchange for a hefty cash prize. We were told there would be cameras, but that they would only record during challenges and scheduled interviews. I figured I could handle a few days of discomfort and pretend panic for a chance at a better life. What I did not expect was how far they would go to blur the line between acting and reality. The first disaster was a mock earthquake that hit in the early hours of the morning. Sirens wailed through the hidden speakers as the ground beneath our bunker vibrated. The lights flickered, dust rained down, and furniture toppled. Everyone scrambled around in a frenzy, unsure of what was part of the act and what was real. When the shaking stopped, a crew member entered to announce it was only a drill. That seemed harmless enough, even exciting in a strange way. But then came the simulated flood, which had us trapped in a submerged facility with rising water and no clear escape route. We were not told how long the scenario would last or where the exit was. I felt the panic grow in my chest as the cold water reached my waist. Some contestants cried out for help, but the cameras stayed fixed on our reactions. After that challenge, I started to notice things that did not sit right. There were cameras hidden in places they had not mentioned: bathrooms, bunk rooms, even behind mirrors. Some of the others joked about it, saying it was probably for dramatic effect. I did not laugh. I began to keep my voice low and avoided conversations near reflective surfaces. The staged fire evacuation pushed me over the edge. Thick smoke filled the compound, and we were forced to crawl through narrow hallways lit by flickering red lights. I burned my hand on a doorknob and could hear someone screaming nearby. When I finally reached the outside, gasping for air, a producer handed me a water bottle and simply said, "Great footage." No medical attention, no apology, just ratings. It started to dawn on me that we were not being filmed during planned moments only. Every second was monitored. They wanted raw, unfiltered reactions to pain and fear. They wanted to watch us break, and I think they wanted to see how far we would go before questioning everything. One night, someone disappeared from the bunk next to mine. The bed was still warm, and their belongings untouched. I asked about it during breakfast, but the producers brushed it off and claimed it was part of the experience. No one else seemed to care, or maybe they were just too afraid to speak up. I kept watching that empty bed, waiting for a clue or a return. They upped the ante with a fake hostage situation that none of us were briefed about. Armed men in tactical gear burst in shouting threats and waving what looked like real guns. We were thrown to the ground, zip-tied and blindfolded. I cried silently, unable to tell if this was part of the game or a real crisis. When they finally removed the blindfold, a camera drone hovered in front of me, catching every raw motion. I stopped trusting the staff after that. They wore smiles and made promises, but I saw the way they watched us like animals in a cage. I tried asking about the missing contestant again, but my questions were ignored or redirected. Eventually, I stopped trying. That person never came back. In one scenario, they simulated a pandemic. We were told a virus had broken containment and that we had to isolate in individual rooms. They gave us fake news broadcasts, fake test results, and fake injections. I stared at the ceiling for hours, wondering if this would be the challenge that broke my mind. Even the silence was designed to feel like torture. When the power went out one night, I wandered the dark halls looking for someone, anyone. The building was eerily quiet. No footsteps, no whispers, just the low hum of the emergency lights. I stumbled into a control room where I found monitors showing every corner of our compound. Footage played on loops, some of it weeks old. One screen showed me sleeping, another showed the empty bunk. They had been watching every moment. I tried to leave. I packed my things and demanded to speak with someone in charge. They refused to unlock the gates, saying I had signed a waiver and that I was free to leave only after completing all challenges. I threatened legal action, but they laughed it off. I realized then I was trapped, not by locks, but by a contract and a hidden audience. The final stage disaster was supposed to be a nuclear meltdown. The alarms blared, the lights turned red, and we were ordered to evacuate immediately. Smoke filled the hallways, and the heat felt real. I remember coughing and crawling and feeling like I might die. But when I burst through the final exit, expecting medics or safety staff, I found rows of cameras and a cheering audience instead. They had filmed everything. The fear, the tears, the breakdowns, all of it broadcast to an unseen world under the label of reality. The producers stood clapping while we stood in confusion. Some contestants cheered back, thrilled to be famous. But I stood frozen, my heart still racing, unable to understand how this had become entertainment. They handed us our checks and released us with a wave and a smile. There was no follow-up, no therapy, no explanation. Just a car to the airport and a contract reminding us of our silence. I sat in that car staring out the window, feeling like a part of me had been taken without permission. Not my money, not my time, but my sense of safety. I spent weeks recovering once I got home. I jumped at loud sounds, avoided cameras, and slept with the lights on. When the show finally aired, I could not bring myself to watch it. I read the reviews, saw the trending hashtags, but refused to see myself in that distorted mirror. I did not want to relive what they had turned into entertainment. Over time, I began speaking with others who had gone through the same thing. Quiet phone calls, hidden forums, careful words. We shared our stories, our injuries, our trauma. Together, we realized that we had all been manipulated, not just as contestants, but as people. We filed a case, not for money, but for accountability, or recognition that what they did was not just cruel, but dangerous. The producers denied everything, claiming we had agreed to the terms. But the public began to turn. Viewers who once laughed at our fears started asking questions. The pressure grew. Eventually, the show was pulled off air. The studio issued a statement about reviewing ethical practices. I do not think it will change them, not really. But for the first time, I felt like my voice had power. I had not survived just the challenges, but the exploitation behind them. I still carry the scars from that show, both visible and hidden. But I am no longer afraid to tell the truth. I did not join a game, I walked into a trap dressed as opportunity. And I got out before they could turn me into a shell of myself. That, to me, is the real victory. Story 2. I remember the exact moment my partner told me the truth. We had been sitting in the living room, the late afternoon sun slipping through the blinds, casting long stripes of light on the floor. I had just asked a question I thought was harmless. It was something like, what made you fall for me in the beginning? I never expected the answer I got. They looked at me for a moment, their expression unreadable. Then they said it calmly, almost too calmly. I dated you as an experiment. Those words hit me harder than any scream or insult ever could. I felt the floor drop beneath me. At first I thought I misheard. Maybe it was a joke or a misunderstanding. But they did not laugh or try to correct themselves. They just sat there watching me take it in. My heart felt like it had turned to stone in my chest. I asked what they meant, trying to keep my voice steady. I wanted to believe there was some better explanation. They told me they had been curious about dating someone like me. I was different from the people they usually went for. That difference was what they wanted to test. I tried to process what I was hearing. I was not a person to them at the start. I was a variable in some private experiment. They wanted to see how it would feel to be with someone like me. The idea of it made my skin crawl. They said they thought I was kind, genuine, maybe even too trusting. That made me a good candidate for their so-called experiment. I was supposed to help them understand what they were missing in their usual relationships. In their words, I was something new to explore. I felt sick. I wanted to scream, but I could not find my voice. Instead, I asked the only question I could think of. "So do you love me now?" They hesitated before answering. That pause told me everything I needed to know. They said yes, but it did not sound convincing. It sounded like they were trying to soften the blow. I did not know what hurt more, the fact that I was an experiment or the fact that even now they could not be honest. I stood up and walked away without another word. I needed air. Outside, the evening air was cool and smelled like cut grass. I stood on the porch and tried to breathe. My thoughts were spinning too fast. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and lost all at once. Everything I thought we had suddenly felt fake. I remembered our first date, the way they looked at me. I thought it was real affection. I remembered the little gestures, the inside jokes, the moments of quiet comfort. I used to think they loved me for who I was. Now I questioned every memory. I sat on the porch swing and stared into the distance. Part of me wanted to walk away and never look back. But another part needed answers. I needed to understand how someone could treat another person that way. I needed to understand what I meant to them, if anything at all. Later that night, I went back inside. They were still sitting in the same spot. I asked why they told me now. Why bring it up after everything we had been through? They said they felt guilty and wanted to come clean. I almost laughed at that. They said the experiment stopped being one a long time ago. They claimed they had fallen for me along the way. But trust once broken does not repair so easily. I told them that. I said I did not know if I could believe anything anymore. They looked sad but did not fight me on it. That almost hurt more. I wanted them to beg, to apologize in a way that felt real. But they just sat there silent, like they had already made peace with the damage they caused. Over the next few days, I kept my distance. I needed time to think, to feel, to heal. I went for walks, cooked my own meals, kept the television on just for background noise. I cried when I was alone. But slowly, the pain started to dull. I thought a lot about self-worth, about how easy it is to lose yourself in someone else. I thought about how I had let myself believe we had something special. I wondered what kind of person uses someone like that. But more than that, I wondered why I ignored the signs. Looking back, there were moments that should have made me pause. Times when they seemed detached, like they were observing instead of participating. Questions they asked that seemed oddly clinical. But I was too eager to believe in the fantasy. I wanted it to be real. One morning I sat at the kitchen table and made a decision. I could not stay in something that started with a lie, even if they claimed to love me now. The foundation was cracked beyond repair. I needed to choose myself. I told them I was leaving. Their reaction was muted, like they had been expecting it. They said they were sorry again, but it did not change anything. I packed my things quietly. No yelling, no drama, just silence. Leaving was not easy. Every item I packed had a memory attached to it. But I knew that staying would only lead to more hurt. I deserved a relationship built on truth, not curiosity. I deserved to be loved for who I was, not what I represented. After I left, I moved into a small apartment across town. It was nothing fancy, but it was mine. I filled it with plants, soft blankets, and sunlight. I started going to therapy. I talked about what happened until the pain felt like a story instead of a wound. It took time, but I started to heal. I rebuilt my confidence piece by piece. I reminded myself that their actions said more about them than about me. I had been honest and kind. I had loved with my whole heart. That was not a weakness. Eventually, I began to feel whole again. I smiled without forcing it. I made new friends, tried new things, and even went on a few dates. I was cautious but hopeful. I knew I was capable of love, and I knew I would find it in someone who saw me as more than a test. One day, while walking home from the market, I saw them across the street. They looked the same, but something in their eyes had changed. They gave a small nod. I returned it and kept walking. I felt no anger, no pain, just peace. In the end, I was grateful, not for the betrayal, but for what it taught me. I learned that my worth is not defined by how others treat me. I learned to listen to my instincts. And most of all, I learned that healing is possible, even after the deepest hurt. I look back now and see a version of myself who needed to be broken to grow. It is not a path I would have chosen, but it led me to a better place. A place where I love myself fully. A place where I am no longer an experiment. Just a person, finally free. Story 3. When the email from the DNA testing site arrived, I opened it without much thought. I had taken the test out of curiosity months ago and forgotten all about it. The message said there was a new match in my family tree, someone marked as a close relative. I assumed it might be a cousin or an unknown half-sibling from my father's side. Instead, it was a woman who claimed I was her long-missing sister. At first, I thought it was a mistake, some glitch in the system, or a scam. But the site verified the match with a very high percentage of shared DNA. The woman had also uploaded photos of herself and old family documents, trying to prove her story. She messaged me directly, saying she had been searching for her sister for over 20 years. I stared at her face in the picture and tried to find something familiar. She looked a little like me, but I was not convinced. Her eyes had a different shape, and her features were sharper. Still, there was something about her expression, something in the way her lips curved when she smiled. She claimed our mother had given me away when I was a baby. I had no memory of anything like that. According to her, I had been taken to another city and raised by a different family. My supposed biological mother had been in an unstable relationship and made the decision out of desperation. I grew up believing the couple who raised me were my birth parents. Well, they never hinted at any secrets or unusual circumstances about my birth. I confronted them about it, expecting laughter or denial. Instead, their faces turned pale, and they exchanged a long, silent look. My mother started crying before she said a word. My father sat quietly, staring at the floor with clenched fists. That silence confirmed more than words ever could. They admitted they had adopted me, but it was not through legal channels. My mother had met a woman at a church support group who begged her to take the baby. She said the child needed a better life, and she was too broken to provide it. They were told never to ask questions, and for years they kept their promise. I was angry, confused, and hollow. Everything I knew about myself suddenly felt like a lie. I thought about all the times I had felt different, the times I wondered why I never looked like either parent. It all made sense now, but it was a truth I never asked for. The woman who called herself my sister wanted to meet. We agreed to meet at a small cafe halfway between our cities. I arrived early, my hands trembling as I gripped a lukewarm cup of tea. When she walked in, I recognized her immediately. Her posture, her cautious steps, even the way she scanned the room. It was like looking at someone from a dream I had forgotten. We talked for hours, sharing fragments of childhood memories. She remembered having a baby sister who disappeared after their mother left her with a friend. There were police reports, interviews, and dead ends. The trail went cold, and the case was closed. But she never gave up the search. I listened with disbelief, absorbing details that seemed to align with parts of my own life. She had a photo of us as children, taken before I disappeared. I held it in my hand, stunned by the image of two little girls holding hands, one of them unmistakably me. The photo looked old, worn at the edges, and real. It made my chest ache. She gave me copies of birth records, notes written by our mother, and the contact information of a retired detective who had worked the case. I reviewed every piece of evidence with a skeptical eye. Still, everything pointed to the same conclusion. I had been the missing child all along. I asked her why she kept looking when everyone else had given up. She said because family does not disappear, not in her heart. She had made a promise to our mother on her deathbed to never stop searching. That promise became her mission. And now, after all this time, she believed she had finally found me. I went home that night feeling like a stranger in my own skin. I searched through my old photo albums, childhood toys, and school drawings. None of them could answer the questions in my mind. I called my parents again, hoping they would help fill in the blanks. They were shaken but supportive. They said they had always feared this day would come, but they had done their best to give me a good life. I did not doubt their love, but I resented the silence. They apologized through tears, saying they were trying to protect me. In the end, it did not feel like protection. It felt like a wall between me and the truth. I met with the retired detective, who confirmed the original investigation. He remembered the case and still had copies of the missing person report. He said the photo matched, and the DNA results were consistent. He offered no legal advice, just his belief that I was indeed the missing girl. His certainty left me speechless. I agreed to visit my supposed childhood neighborhood with the woman. She showed me the house we had lived in, now abandoned and boarded up. The neighbors remembered the tragedy. Gaze, my. One of them even recalled holding me as a baby. It was overwhelming to stand there, surrounded by ghosts of a life I never knew I had. The woman cried as she showed me a journal she had kept over the years. It documented every lead, every dead end, and every emotion she had endured. Her devotion was undeniable. I started to believe her story more with each passing day. There was too much truth in her grief to be fiction. Over the next few weeks, we talked almost every day. She told me about her life, her family, her memories of our mother. I shared stories from my own upbringing, and we laughed at the odd parallels. The connection between us began to grow, not from biology, but from shared healing. We were trying to build something from pieces. My adoptive parents invited her over for dinner. It was tense at first, but eventually they warmed up to her. She thanked them for raising me with love and care. They said they were grateful she found me. It felt like the beginning of something whole, a bridge between two lives. We decided to take a second DNA test through another company just to be certain. The results came back even more conclusive than the first. There was no longer any room for doubt. She was my sister. The little girl in the photo was me. I went to visit her home and met her children. They called me auntie and hugged me like they had known me forever. It was surreal, stepping into a life I never imagined. Her husband welcomed me with warmth and kindness. They had kept a place for me in their hearts without knowing if I would ever return. We honored our mother by visiting her grave together. I left flowers and a note she would never read. I told her I was safe, loved, and ready to begin again. Standing beside my sister, I no longer felt lost. I felt found. We still have questions, and some wounds are slow to heal. But we are not alone anymore. We are rewriting our story with honesty and love. Sometimes the truth hurts, but it also sets you free. In the end, I found not just a sister, but a part of myself that was missing. The past may have been broken, but the future is ours to shape. We are family, not by chance, but by choice. And that choice has changed everything. Story 4. I hired a private investigator because of a string of odd events that had been piling up for months. Letters addressed to me would arrive from places I had never been. I received medical bills for procedures I never underwent and notices of appointments I never scheduled. At first, I blamed clerical errors or fraud, but the inconsistencies became too specific to ignore. But the investigator I hired promised to look into everything quietly. Weeks passed without updates, and I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. Then I received a call from the investigator asking to meet in person. He sounded different over the phone, like he was trying to hide shock or unease. I agreed to meet him at a small cafe downtown, thinking he might have uncovered a scam. When I arrived, he was already there with a folder thick with documents. He laid out the evidence slowly, as if unsure how I would react. There were photos of a woman who looked just like me, down to the haircut and wardrobe. She had used my name, my social security number, and had even signed contracts I had no knowledge of. She was living in a rented house under my name, just a few towns away. The strangest part was that she seemed to have an entire life parallel to mine. She worked in a nearby office under the same job title as mine and even had mutual contacts I recognized. But some of the people I saw in the photos were acquaintances of mine from years ago. The investigator had managed to follow her for a few days and saw her routine, which eerily mirrored mine. He said she was good at staying off the grid and only slipped up when she used my insurance card. That was how her trail became visible. My first reaction was disbelief, followed by a creeping sense of violation. Someone was living as me and doing it convincingly enough to avoid suspicion. I could not understand how she had gained access to so much of my information. The investigator believed it started with a data breach at an old workplace. From there, she built a complete identity that matched mine perfectly. I left the meeting feeling like the world had tilted slightly. Every memory I had felt tainted, every corner of my life suspect. I went home and searched every drawer and account for signs of tampering. Passwords were changed, and I put alerts on all my financial institutions. But the sense of unease never left. The investigator called me again a few days later to report that she had made a mistake. She had applied for a mortgage under my name, triggering an alert that gave us an exact address. He offered to go there himself, but I insisted on going too. I needed to see her with my own eyes. The house was a modest one on a quiet street. From the outside, it looked normal, even comforting. But my heart pounded as we waited in the car. Eventually, she came out to check the mailbox. It was like looking into a mirror that reflected a version of me I did not know. She wore the same style of clothes I did, and even had a similar way of walking. The investigator took photos from the car, then said we had enough to go to the authorities. I told him I wanted more than that. I wanted to speak to her. He advised against it, but I was already getting out of the car. She looked startled when I called out to her, but not scared. She squinted at me like she was trying to place me. Then a strange smile formed on her lips. She invited me in without hesitation, like she had been expecting me. Against all logic, I followed her. Her house was filled with photos of her with people I recognized from my past. There were certificates on the wall in my name, graduation photos I never posed for. She made tea while I stood there, stunned. Then she sat down across from me and started to speak calmly. She said she had been watching me for years. She claimed she was not stealing my life, only continuing it. She spoke in vague terms, referencing things I barely remembered. She knew about a childhood injury I never talked about, and a pet I had lost in elementary school. Her knowledge was too intimate to be coincidental. She had either done extensive research or something far more unsettling. I asked her why. She said my life had a rhythm, a structure she admired. She wanted that stability and saw no harm in borrowing it. She said she had no family, no connections, and no identity worth keeping. She chose mine because it felt safe and complete. I told her it was theft, no matter how she justified it. But she simply nodded and said she understood I would see it that way. She claimed she was ready to stop now, ready to vanish and start over. She said she only ever wanted to feel like she belonged somewhere. I did not trust her, but I also saw something broken in her expression. I told her she had to stop using my name and erase all traces of her fake life. She agreed and even handed over several documents. I took them and left the house, shaken but calm. The investigator reported everything to the authorities. She disappeared a few days later, leaving behind no trace. The house was empty, the utilities shut off, and all records erased. It was like she had never existed. Even the photos had been removed from the walls. In the weeks that followed, I started to feel like myself again. But I remained cautious, watching for signs of her return. I checked my credit reports regularly and kept in touch with the investigator. Still, part of me wondered if she was really gone or simply watching from a new distance. Months passed without any new developments. Eventually, the investigator closed the case. He believed she had truly moved on, perhaps even assumed a new identity far from here. I wanted to believe that too. But something inside me remained alert, like a silent alarm waiting to go off. One day, a letter arrived with no return address. Inside was a single photo of me as a child, one I had never seen before. On the back was a note that simply said thank you. I stared at it for a long time, unsure what to feel. Then I placed it in a drawer and locked it away. My life gradually returned to normal. I focused on my work, rebuilt my routines, and reconnected with old friends. The experience stayed with me, not as a trauma but as a strange chapter I survived. I learned to protect my identity more carefully and trust my instincts. In a strange way, confronting her helped me reclaim myself. What she took from me was real, but what I recovered was stronger. I know now that I am more than a set of documents or a name. I am the memories only I can truly own. Whatever her reasons, she could never steal that. And that is what let me move on with peace. Story 5. It started on a Thursday morning, one of those days that felt like it had nothing special to offer. I was walking to the train station, coffee in hand, earbuds in, lost in the usual playlist I relied on to make the commute bearable. The crowd around me was familiar, the same tired faces making their way to jobs they did not love. I was already thinking about my first meeting of the day, dreading the questions I would be asked. Then someone tapped me on the shoulder and everything changed. The man looked disheveled but alert, eyes sharp and focused in a way that made me instantly wary. He said he needed to speak to me, that it was urgent, that I was in danger. I stepped back, ready to walk away, but he pulled something from his coat pocket that froze me in place. It was a photograph of me, sitting in a hospital bed, hooked up to machines I did not recognize. The date on the print was 2 years in the future. I thought it was a trick at first, some scam or elaborate prank meant to scare or manipulate me. I told him I did not know who he was and had no time for whatever game he was playing. But he pulled out more photos, each one more disturbing than the last. In one I was older, crying on the floor of what looked like my apartment. In another I was standing alone on a bridge at night, staring at the water with a blank expression. He said he was a traveler from the future, not here to hurt me but to warn me. I laughed out loud, unable to stop myself from reacting to the absurdity of it. He did not flinch or argue, just waited until I was done. Then he told me about things I had never shared with anyone, things buried deep that even I had tried to forget. It was not just the facts he got right, but how he said them, like someone who had lived through them too. He said that if I kept living the way I was, the future in those photographs would come true. The hospital visit, the breakdown, the loneliness were all consequences of choices I had not yet made. He said I was not in danger from others, but from myself. That I would slowly stop trusting people, stop taking care of myself, and one day just let go. I wanted to leave, to run away from this stranger and his horrible pictures, but I could not move. Instead, I asked him for proof, something that could not be faked or guessed. He handed me a folded piece of paper with a number on it and told me to check my bank account. I almost ignored him, thinking it was another trick, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the banking app on my phone and saw a deposit had been made just minutes earlier. The amount matched exactly what he had written down. He said he could not stay long, that others were looking for him, but that he had done what he came to do. I asked him why he cared, why he would risk so much to warn someone like me. He looked sad, older than he appeared, and said I had helped him once in his original timeline. That he owed me his life, and this was the only way to repay that debt before everything changed. He told me there was still time to avoid the worst of it, but I had to take action now. Start therapy, reach out to the friend I had stopped talking to, quit the job that was draining the life out of me. He even gave me a list of dates when important things would happen, though he warned that knowing too much could also be dangerous. Then he turned and walked away, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with a fistful of terrifying images. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, unable to focus on anything. Every sound, every shadow, every interaction felt like it was part of some larger plan I did not understand. I checked the photos again and again, hoping to find flaws, inconsistencies, anything to prove they were fake. But they were too perfect, down to the smallest detail, like the scar on my wrist I had never shown anyone. My mind kept returning to the one with me on the bridge. That night I dreamed of the bridge and the water below it. I saw myself climbing over the railing, felt the cold wind on my face, heard the silence of the city at night. I woke up sweating, heart racing, terrified not by the dream but by how peaceful I had looked in it. It scared me more than any nightmare ever had. I knew something in me was already heading toward that moment. I called my old friend that morning, the one I had pushed away after a petty argument I barely remembered. They were surprised to hear from me but agreed to meet. We talked for hours, both of us crying at some point, letting go of old anger and guilt. That conversation felt like air after being underwater for too long. It was the first moment of clarity I had felt in months. Then I searched for therapists in my area, booking the earliest appointment I could find. I was nervous, unsure of what I would even say, but I went anyway. I told the therapist about the photos, leaving out the time travel part, focusing instead on what they showed me. She did not ask how I got them, only how they made me feel. That session became the first of many. Quitting the job was the hardest part. I had built my identity around it, even though it had been slowly crushing me for years. I gave notice and left without fanfare, walking out with no plan but a sense of freedom I had not expected. I started freelancing, something I had always wanted to try but never dared. The money was uncertain, but I felt more alive than I had in years. Weeks passed, then months. I started noticing changes in myself, small at first. I smiled more. I slept better. I spent time with people again. My apartment felt less like a prison and more like a home. And one day, while walking past that same bridge from the photo, I stopped and just looked at it. I stood there for a long time, remembering the image of myself on the edge. I was not sure if that future was still possible, or if I had already changed it. The man had said too much knowledge could be dangerous, and I began to understand why. I no longer wanted to know what would happen. I wanted to live it and find out for myself. I never saw the stranger again, and part of me doubts I ever will. Sometimes I wonder if he was real at all, or if my mind created him as a way to force myself to change. But it does not matter anymore. Whether he came from the future or not, his warning saved my life. And that is all I need to believe in. Story 6. The bell above the door gave a soft jingle as I stepped inside the coffee shop. It was the kind of sound that usually faded into the background, but this time it felt sharp and deliberate, like the shop itself had announced my arrival. The warm scent of roasted beans and sweet pastries wrapped around me, both comforting and strangely familiar. I hesitated near the entrance, looking around at the cozy interior and wondering why it felt like I had been there before. The barista behind the counter locked eyes with me and smiled like we shared a secret. "We have been waiting for you to come back," she said softly, her voice cutting through the low hum of conversation and grinding machines. My mouth opened slightly, unsure of what to say, but no words came out. I glanced over my shoulder, thinking she might be talking to someone else, but there was no one behind me. Her smile remained steady, not creepy or forced, just oddly knowing. It was the kind of expression someone wears when they are sure of something before you are. I stepped toward the counter and looked over the menu as if that would buy me time. The names of the drinks were ordinary, nothing unusual, but each word stirred a strange tug in my chest. I could not shake the feeling that I had stood in that exact spot before. The barista leaned slightly forward, as if expecting me to order without needing to look. I pointed to the first drink on the list and she nodded without writing anything down. As she prepared the coffee, I found a seat by the window and sat down, my heart tapping a little faster than normal. The shop was quiet except for a few other patrons who seemed absorbed in their own worlds. Outside, the street was busy, but none of the noise seemed to reach inside. It was as if the coffee shop existed in its own slow-moving bubble. I tried to focus on my breathing, unsure why I felt so tense. When she brought the drink over, I thanked her, and she said my name before walking away. I had not told her my name. I froze in my seat, the cup warm in my hands, but suddenly feeling too heavy. I looked around again, wondering if I had dropped my ID or if there was some other explanation. No one else seemed to notice anything odd. The coffee was exactly how I liked it, down to the perfect balance of bitterness and sweetness. That made me even more uneasy. I tried to remember if I had ever been to this shop before, maybe during a trip or on my way somewhere else. But I had no memory of it, and yet everything about it felt tailored to me, from the music playing softly in the background to the design on the coffee cup. As I sipped, I noticed a photograph on the wall near the counter. It showed a group of people gathered inside the same shop, smiling and raising cups. My breath caught when I noticed someone in the back who looked exactly like me. I stood up and walked over to get a better look, the cup trembling slightly in my hand. The figure had the same haircut, the same posture, even the same jacket I was wearing now. I turned to the barista, my voice barely above a whisper. "When was this taken?" She looked at the photo without needing to get closer and said it had been taken years ago. I asked who the person in the back was, and she just tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "You do not remember, do you?" she asked, like she already knew the answer. I shook my head slowly, feeling cold despite the warmth of the shop. "You came here every morning," she said, "before you left. You said you would be back." She looked down for a moment, then added, "We kept the place the same, just like you asked." I was about to ask what she meant when another customer approached the counter and interrupted us. I returned to my seat, still watching her carefully as she served the other person. My mind raced through possible explanations. Maybe I had some form of amnesia, or maybe this was a prank. But everything felt too genuine. I pulled out my phone and tried to search for the shop online, but no results came up. It was like it did not exist outside the four walls I was sitting in. My chest tightened, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. I thought about asking the other patrons if they remembered me, but something about them felt distant. They sipped their drinks, turned pages in their books, and stared out the windows like they had all the time in the world. None of them seemed real in the way I expected people to be. I wondered if they had been waiting for me too. The barista returned with a small notebook and set it on my table. I opened it slowly, unsure of what I would find. Inside were pages filled with handwriting that looked exactly like mine. Notes about dreams, lists of songs, sketches of coffee cups and pastries. Each page felt like it belonged to a version of me I had forgotten, or one I had chosen to leave behind. "You said you would need this when you came back," the barista said. I stared at the words, unable to make sense of how they got there. Flipping through the pages, I found one with today's date written at the top. Below it was a short message. "Sit by the window. Order the usual. Do not be afraid." My fingers trembled as I read it again and again. I looked up and caught the barista watching me with gentle eyes. I asked her who I was to her, what this place was. She hesitated, then said, "You are someone who wanted a place to remember. And we are the ones who promised not to forget." I closed the notebook and took a deep breath, feeling a strange peace settle over me. I still did not understand everything, but the panic had faded. I stayed there for a long while, sipping the rest of my drink and listening to the quiet rhythm of the shop. Time seemed to slow down, stretching between heartbeats and the soft clink of mugs. Eventually, I stood up and placed the notebook into my bag. The barista smiled and nodded as if I had passed some silent test. "Come back when you are ready again," she said. I nodded and stepped outside, the bell chiming once more behind me. The air felt different, lighter, as if something heavy had been lifted from my chest. I walked down the street with no destination in mind. The city moved around me like it always had, but I felt more connected to it now. I could not explain what had happened inside that shop, and maybe I never would. But something inside me had shifted, something old and buried brought to light. I was not the same person who had walked in, and I did not need to be. The coffee shop faded into the distance behind me, but I knew it would still be there. Waiting, ready, just like it had always been. Story 7. I was walking down the narrow street just as the sun was dipping low behind the tall buildings. The day had been long and exhausting, filled with meetings and the endless buzzing of emails. I kept my head down, hoping to avoid any unnecessary conversation as I made my way home. The air was thick with the smell of rain that never quite came, and the streets were quieter than usual for this time of day. As I passed the small church on the corner, I noticed the preacher standing near the entrance. He was an older man, dressed in simple black robes that contrasted sharply with the fading light. His eyes met mine for a brief moment, but I tried to ignore him, keeping my pace steady. Just as I moved past him, his voice slipped out, low and urgent, barely above a whisper. He said my deepest secret aloud, the one I had buried so carefully beneath years of silence. My heart skipped a beat, a cold rush flooding through me. I froze for a second, my mind scrambling to understand how he could possibly know. No one had ever known, not even my closest friends or family. The secret was a weight I had carried alone, one I thought was locked away forever. It was a truth that had shaped every choice I had made, yet no one had ever spoken it aloud. Now, hearing it from his lips, the words hung in the air like a ghost I could no longer ignore. I swallowed hard, trying to force my legs to move again. He looked at me with a strange mixture of pity and determination. It was as if he wanted me to acknowledge what he had said, to somehow find relief in the exposure. But I was not ready to face the judgment or the consequences. I walked faster, eager to put distance between us, but his voice followed me in my mind. I turned a corner and disappeared into the crowd, blending into the blur of faces that never stopped moving. The city was alive around me, indifferent to the turmoil brewing inside. I told myself it was a mistake, that the preacher must have been mistaken or confused. Yet the words echoed relentlessly in my mind, refusing to be silenced. I thought about the secret itself and why it held such power over me. It was something shameful, something I had tried to erase from my memory. Yet here it was, pulled from the shadows and thrust into the light. For the first time, I wondered if hiding it had done me more harm than good. That night, I could not sleep. The preacher's whisper replayed in my head like a broken record. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the walls close in. It was as if my past had caught up with me, demanding to be faced. I realized I had a choice to keep running from the truth or finally confront it. The next day, I avoided the church, steering clear of the street corner where the preacher stood. But curiosity gnawed at me. Who was he to know such a thing? How had he learned my secret? I found myself wondering if others might know too, if the careful facade I had built was cracking. The fear of exposure was suffocating. Slowly, I began to accept that the secret was no longer mine alone. The preacher had taken it from the silence and spoken it aloud, forcing me to acknowledge it. It was a strange relief, like a wound finally opened for cleaning. I realized that holding on to the secret had kept me trapped in a cage of my own making. In the days that followed, I watched the preacher from a distance. He was no longer just a figure in the street, but a symbol of something I needed to understand. He did not judge or condemn, only spoke the truth I had hidden. I felt a strange gratitude toward him, though I could not explain why. Maybe he was the first step toward healing. One afternoon, I found myself standing outside the church doors, hesitating before stepping inside. The room was simple and quiet, filled with the faint scent of old wood and candle wax. The preacher greeted me without surprise, as if he had been waiting. There was no preaching, no demand for confession, only an invitation to speak. I told him the secret, this time in my own voice without shame or fear. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, yet the words felt lighter as they left my lips. The preacher listened with patient eyes, offering no judgment, only understanding. For the first time, I felt seen and accepted. Over time, I returned to the church, not as a person running from the past, but as someone learning to live with it. The secret did not vanish, but it lost its power to control me. I found strength in the quiet acceptance and the simple act of speaking the truth. Life felt more open, less burdened by shadows. One evening, after a long conversation, the preacher handed me a small book. It was worn and filled with passages about forgiveness and grace. He told me that sometimes the heaviest burdens are lifted not by hiding but by sharing. I took the book with a tentative smile, feeling hope where there had only been fear. The whisper on the street had changed everything, though I had not understood it at first. It had forced me out of hiding, into a new way of living. I learned that secrets can bind us in chains, but when shared with care, they can also set us free. The preacher's words were a strange kind of salvation. Looking back, I realized that the moment I passed him was not a moment of shame, but the start of a journey. The secret was no longer a curse, but a part of my story, one I could face without fear. In that quiet church, and in the whisper that shattered my silence, I found a beginning I had never expected. Story 8. The old woman sat behind a small table covered in faded cloth. Her eyes, clouded with age but sharp as a hawk's, fixed on me with urgency. She reached out trembling hands, gripping mine tightly. Her voice was low but insistent when she said, "You must not go home tonight." I laughed nervously, brushing off the strange warning. The streets outside were quiet, and the evening breeze felt normal. I thanked her politely, but my heart beat a little faster. Something about her desperation unsettled me, but I decided to ignore it. On my way home, the city lights flickered oddly, as if warning me of something unseen. Every shadow seemed to stretch too long, and the quiet felt too deep. I tried to shake the feeling of unease, but it clung to me stubbornly. The fortune teller's words echoed in my mind. When I finally reached my building, the front door was ajar. A cold chill ran through me. I fumbled with my keys, the uneasiness growing heavier in my chest. I told myself it was probably just the wind or someone careless. Stepping inside, the faint smell of something burned caught my attention. It was not smoke, but a sharp metallic scent that made my stomach turn. I called out, but there was no answer. The silence in the apartment felt unnatural, thick and suffocating. The lights flickered once before going out completely. I reached for my phone to turn on the flashlight, but the battery was dead. Panic began to creep in. I wanted to leave, but something urged me forward. I moved cautiously through the dark rooms, my heart pounding in my ears. Every creak and whisper of the old building seemed louder than it should be. Then I saw a fresh smear of something dark on the wall near the kitchen. I swallowed hard and followed the trail to the living room. There, scattered papers and broken glass lay on the floor. My hands trembled as I tried to make sense of the chaos. It felt like a violent struggle had taken place, but there was no one in sight. Suddenly I heard footsteps above me. A shadow moved swiftly across the ceiling light. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Whoever was there knew I was inside. I crept toward the stairs, my every step echoing. I wished I had listened to the fortune teller. Fear gripped me tightly, but I needed answers. At the top, I found the bedroom door slightly open. Inside, the room was cold and empty. The bed was unmade, and a single shoe lay in the corner. It was a sign someone had left in a hurry. On the dresser, I noticed a note scrawled in a hurried hand. It said simply, "Get out." A sudden noise behind me made me spin around. The window rattled as if something heavy had struck it. I ran to the window and pulled the curtain aside. Outside, the street was empty, but the shadows seemed to pulse with something alive. My phone buzzed suddenly, the screen lighting up with a message. It was from an unknown number. The message read, "You should have stayed away." I dropped the phone, hands shaking. Whoever was watching me knew where I was. I looked back toward the door and saw a figure standing in the dark hallway. I could not make out their face, but the presence was heavy and menacing. I backed away slowly, trying to find a way out. Then the lights flickered back on, and I saw the figure clearly. It was someone I knew, but their eyes were hollow and wild. They moved toward me with a strange desperation, like a trapped animal. I ran past them, heart racing, and burst out the bedroom door. The hallway was longer than I remembered, and the exit felt miles away. I could hear footsteps behind me, closing in fast. Reaching the stairwell, I stumbled down, my breath ragged. The building seemed to shift around me, hallways twisting and stretching. It was as if the place itself was alive and trying to trap me inside. Outside, the cool night air hit my face like a splash of cold water. I did not stop running until the building was far behind me. I knew I could never go back. The fortune teller was right. I found a small cafe still open and sat down, trying to calm my shaking hands. I realized I had no idea who to trust anymore. The person in my apartment was someone close, someone I had never suspected. I called the police and gave them what little information I could. They promised to investigate but warned me to be careful. I knew the danger was not over, not by a long shot. Days passed, and I stayed with a friend far from the city. I kept checking my phone, half expecting another message from the unknown number. The fear lingered like a shadow, never fully fading. One morning I received a letter slipped under the door. Inside was a simple note. You were warned. Stay away from home. A small charm wrapped in cloth accompanied it, a symbol of protection. I clutched the charm tightly and understood that some warnings are meant to be taken seriously. The fortune teller's plea was not superstition, but a desperate call for my safety. I never returned to that apartment. Instead, I moved far away and changed my routine. Every day I thought about what could have happened if I had ignored that warning. The fortune teller's words saved me from a fate I am still too afraid to imagine. From that night on, I never doubted the power of a warning spoken in earnest fear. Somewhere deep inside, I carry the memory of that night and the old woman who begged me to listen. It is a reminder that sometimes fate speaks through strangers. I learned that not every voice can be ignored, and not every warning is a lie. Some truths come wrapped in fear and desperation, and it is wise to heed them. The night I almost lost everything taught me that survival sometimes depends on trusting the unknown. The fortune teller was right. I must never go home again. Story 9. I was sitting at my desk on a quiet Thursday afternoon when my phone started ringing. The number flashing on the screen was mine. For a moment, I thought it was a prank or some kind of glitch. I hesitated but eventually answered, curious and a little uneasy. The moment I picked up, a chilling sound came through the speaker. It was a recording of my own voice screaming in terror. The scream was raw, desperate, and full of fear. I froze, unable to move or speak, heart pounding against my chest like it wanted to break free. I tried to convince myself it was some kind of deep fake or a manipulated audio file, but the scream was unmistakably mine. I had no idea where it came from or who could have recorded it. I had not screamed like that recently, not that I could remember anyway. I checked my phone's call log, hoping to find some clue or an unknown number linked to this strange call. There was nothing unusual apart from the call from my own number. I felt a creeping sensation crawl down my spine as I realized I had no control over this strange event. I sat back and tried to think clearly. Who would want to scare me like this? Was it a prank from someone I knew? Or something more sinister? My mind raced through possible scenarios, but none made sense. The scream haunted me, echoing in my head long after the call ended. The next day, I decided to tell a close friend about the call. I described the eerie sound and how it shook me to the core. My friend suggested that maybe my phone was hacked or there was some form of electronic interference. I wanted to believe it was just a technical glitch, but a small part of me feared something else. Later that afternoon, the phone rang again. This time, the caller ID was blocked. I answered cautiously, expecting the worst. Instead of screaming, I heard silence, except for faint breathing. It sounded like someone was on the other end, watching or waiting. The silence was almost more terrifying than the scream. I tried to trace the call with the help of my friend who was good with technology. We searched for any sign of hacking or malware but found nothing concrete. My phone seemed clean, but the strange calls continued sporadically. Each time, my own screen played, or there was unsettling silence. I started feeling paranoid in my own home. Every time the phone rang, my heart would race. I avoided answering calls if I did not recognize the number. I even considered turning off my phone entirely, but the idea of being cut off made me uneasy. What if someone really needed to reach me? At night, I became more alert to every sound around me. The scream from the recording played in my mind on repeat. Sometimes I thought I heard faint cries outside my window or footsteps in the hallway. Sleep became difficult, and my days blurred together in a haze of fear and exhaustion. One evening, as I sat alone, the phone rang again. The caller ID showed my number once more. I swallowed hard and answered, bracing for the scream. Instead, a voice spoke softly, almost whispering. It said something I could barely understand, a warning maybe, or a plea for help. I asked the voice who it was, but it only repeated the words in a low tone. I could not make out much, but the fear in the voice was clear. Then the call abruptly ended. I sat in silence, heart pounding. Something was wrong, and I was caught in the middle of it. I contacted the local authorities and explained the strange calls. They took my report seriously and suggested I bring my phone in for examination. I agreed, desperate for answers. The technician examined the device carefully but found no signs of tampering or hacking. The mystery deepened as no evidence was found to explain the strange events. I started to wonder if this was some form of psychological attack, or if someone was trying to drive me mad. The calls had disrupted my life, leaving me feeling vulnerable and unsafe. Weeks passed with no new calls. I began to think the nightmare was over. Maybe it had been a random glitch or a prank that ran its course. I tried to return to normal life, though the memory of the scream never left me completely. Then one night I woke up to a loud banging at my door. My heart raced as I slowly got up to check. Or outside, no one was there, but when I looked down I found a small recording device taped to the door frame. My stomach twisted with dread. I took the device inside and played the recording. It was my scream again, the same chilling sound that haunted me for weeks. Someone had been watching me, listening, and playing with my mind. The terror was real, and the threat was closer than I had imagined. I called the police immediately and handed over the device. They promised to investigate, but I could tell they were unsure where to start. I realized then that this was more than a technical prank, it was personal and deliberate. I changed my phone number and took extra precautions at home. Locks were reinforced, and I installed security cameras around the house. Despite all this, I felt watched, as if the person behind the calls was always one step ahead. The calls stopped again for a time, but I knew it was only a matter of time before they returned. The fear of hearing my own scream on the phone became a shadow I could not escape. I dreaded the sound more than anything else. One afternoon, my phone rang while I was at work. I answered with trembling hands. Instead of screaming, the voice on the line was calm and clear. It said, "You cannot hide. We are always close." Then the line went dead. I sat back in shock, trying to process the words. The terror that once felt distant was now terrifyingly near. I knew I had to find a way to stop this, but I had no idea where to begin. In the weeks that followed, I became obsessed with finding the source of the calls. I researched everything about phone hacking, electronic stalking, and psychological harassment. I reached out to experts, but no one had a clear answer. One evening, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a simple note, "You will scream again." No name, no explanation. My hands shook as I read it, knowing this nightmare was far from over. Then, out of nowhere, a new call came through. The number was unfamiliar. I answered, ready for the worst. But this time the voice was different. It was mine, calm and steady, speaking a message I did not remember recording. The voice said, "Help me. Please find me." My mind reeled. Who was speaking to me? Was it a recording from the past or some message from someone else? The scream that had haunted me was now a cry for rescue. I decided to take action. I contacted a private investigator, sharing everything about the calls, the recordings, and the strange messages. I hoped they could trace the source and end the torment. Days later, the investigator called me with news. They had found a lead, a device hidden in a nearby abandoned building. It was connected to my phone and contained recordings of my voice spanning several months. The recordings were disturbing, including screams, pleas, and even moments of silence. It was clear someone had been spying on me for a long time, collecting these sounds and using them to frighten me. The investigator arranged for the authorities to raid the building. Inside, they found equipment for phone tapping and surveillance. They also found evidence that someone had been living there, watching me closely. The case was handed over to the police. I was finally told the person responsible was arrested. The nightmare at last was coming to an end. The sense of relief was overwhelming, but the scars ran deep. I changed my phone again and moved to a new place. The calls never returned. Slowly, I began to rebuild my life, though the memory of those screams remained etched in my mind. In time, I learned to live without fear of the phone ringing. The silence was a welcome friend, replacing the terror I once knew. I still wonder about the person who did this and why they chose me, but I no longer feel powerless. The scream that haunted me became a symbol of survival. I was no longer the victim of a mysterious tormentor. I had faced the darkness and found a way back to light. The calls from my number stopped, but I never forgot the strength it took to answer. Story 10. They greeted me by another name and had my ID. It was the first strange thing that happened that day. I arrived at the office building early, dressed neatly, and holding my documents tightly. The receptionist smiled but said a name that was not mine. I corrected her politely, thinking it was just a mistake. She looked at me oddly, then handed me an identification card. I looked down at it, and there was my picture, but the name was different. I blinked, trying to make sense of it. The card seemed real, like it belonged to someone else who looked exactly like me. It made my skin crawl in a way I could not explain. The receptionist then told me that Mr. Johnson was expecting me in the conference room. She insisted that I was on time for the interview. I told her again that my name was not Johnson, but she just nodded and led me to the door. I felt an uneasy chill as I followed her footsteps down the hallway. The conference room was cold and dimly lit. Inside, a man stood waiting, holding a folder that had my photo on it. He looked at me and smiled but called me by the wrong name. I sat down, trying to keep my composure. I asked him if he was sure about the name because it was not mine. He laughed nervously and said they must have mixed up the files. Still, he asked me a few questions about a job I had never applied for. The description sounded familiar, but not quite right. I tried to steer the conversation toward my actual experience, but he seemed distracted. After some time, he glanced again at the folder and frowned. He said something about a missing signature on the application. I felt like I was in a nightmare that I could not wake from. My heart pounded, and I wondered if this was some kind of trick. I asked if I could see the application they had on file for me. The man hesitated, but then showed me a printed form with my photo and a different name. All the details except the name matched mine perfectly. It was as if my identity had been stolen or duplicated somehow. When I pressed him about the name and ID, he avoided my questions. Suddenly the door opened, and another person entered, looking equally confused. She said she was Mr. Johnson's assistant and apologized for the confusion. She said they had a serious problem with their records. The assistant explained that there was another person with a similar appearance working at the company. She called it a rare coincidence, but said the name they used for me was the other person's. They thought I was that person. I felt a mixture of relief and deeper anxiety. She offered to verify my identity with more official documents. I handed over my papers again, and she carefully checked everything. Then she made a phone call to the Human Resources Department. The situation seemed to worsen by the minute. I overheard part of the conversation where someone said there was a missing employee who matched my physical description. They had reported her as disappeared weeks ago. My blood ran cold. Was I standing in for someone else without knowing? The assistant returned and said she was sorry, but the company needed to investigate further. They could not hire me until they resolved the confusion. I left the office feeling drained and disturbed. The strange mix-up had shaken me more than I expected. On my way home, I kept thinking about the missing employee. Who was she? Why did she look so much like me? I wondered if someone had stolen her identity or mine. It all felt like part of some larger puzzle I had no clue about. That night, I checked online for any news about missing people who resembled me. I found nothing, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. My phone rang, but no one was there when I answered. I felt as if someone was trying to reach me without speaking. Days passed, and I avoided thinking about the interview. Then I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a note that said, "Please be careful. This is not just a mistake." The handwriting was unfamiliar but urgent. I decided to investigate. I contacted the company again. This time they told me the investigation found no record of the other person. They apologized for the confusion but admitted their files might have been tampered with. The whole thing felt like a secret I was not supposed to uncover. Curiosity overcame me. I started to dig deeper into my own background. I found some old photographs where my face looked slightly different. There were gaps in my memories too. I realized I had never asked about my origins carefully. One afternoon, I received a phone call from a woman who claimed to know the truth. She said I was not who I thought I was. She asked me to meet her in a quiet place if I wanted answers. I hesitated but agreed, driven by a desperate need for clarity. When we met, she told me a story that felt unreal. She said there had been a secret experiment involving identical people. Some were switched, some disappeared. She believed I was part of it but had no memory of it. I listened in disbelief. I asked her why the company had my ID and called me by the wrong name. She said it was all connected to that experiment. They kept tabs on those involved and erased records when necessary. I realized my life had been altered without my consent. The woman handed me a folder with documents about my supposed identity in the experiment. I saw medical records, photos, and notes that looked like surveillance reports. My whole understanding of myself shattered in that moment. I left the meeting shaken but with more questions than answers. The next day, I packed some essentials and decided to disappear for a while. I could not face the world with the uncertainty weighing on me. I needed to find the truth on my own terms. Weeks later, I contacted a trusted lawyer who promised to help me investigate further. Slowly, I started piecing together clues about my real identity and the people behind the experiment. It was a dangerous path, but the only way forward. In time, I learned to accept that my past might remain a mystery forever. But I also realized that I was more than a name or a file. I was someone who survived confusion, deception, and fear. That gave me strength to keep moving. The job interview that started it all was just a door into a strange world. I may never know the full story behind the name they called me or the ID they showed. But I found my own identity in the process, one that no mistake or secret could take away. I finally understood that who I am is not only in my name but in the choices I make. And I decided to create a life where I control my story, not the shadows from my past. The experience changed me, but it did not break me. Story 11. I moved into the apartment excited to have my own space for the first time in years. It was small but cozy, with large windows that let in the morning sun and a quiet street outside. The landlord seemed friendly enough during the walkthrough and promised prompt maintenance if I ever needed anything. I never imagined that something as simple as smoke detectors would become the center of a nightmare. The detectors were installed in every room, as expected, but something about them felt off from the beginning. They were bulkier than usual, with tiny lenses where the test buttons should have been. I mentioned it casually to a neighbor once, who shrugged and said they seemed normal to her. I did not press further because I did not want to seem paranoid. A few weeks after moving in, I noticed my landlord stopping by more often than necessary. He would claim it was routine inspections or to check the plumbing, but the visits never felt right. Sometimes he would linger near the ceilings or glance suspiciously at the detectors. I started feeling like I was being watched, even when I was alone. One afternoon, I caught him on the stairs with a small device that looked like a remote control. He seemed nervous and quickly hid it when he saw me looking. That night, I searched online for information about smoke detectors with hidden cameras. What I found shocked me. It turns out there were plenty of stories about landlords using fake detectors to spy on tenants without their knowledge. I decided to inspect the detectors myself. With a screwdriver, I carefully removed one from the ceiling in my living room. Inside was not the usual wiring or smoke sensors, but a tiny camera lens and a small microphone. My heart pounded as I realized I had been living under constant surveillance. The privacy I thought I had was an illusion. I knew I had to do something, but was terrified of the consequences. What if the landlord found out I was onto him? What if he decided to evict me or worse? I took photos of the fake detector and planned to contact the authorities, but I was cautious. I did not want to be dismissed as a troublemaker. When I finally reported the issue to the police, they took it seriously but warned me that proving intent could be tricky. They suggested I gather more evidence discreetly and avoid confrontations. I installed my own security camera outside my door to capture any suspicious visits. It was a small step toward reclaiming control. Meanwhile, I reached out to other tenants in the building. To my surprise, many of them had noticed strange behavior from the landlord but were too scared to speak up. Some had even found fake detectors in their apartments but assumed it was a mistake or a new security system. Together, we decided to document everything and support one another. The landlord's visits became more frequent and invasive, as if he knew we were onto him. He knocked on doors late at night and asked strange questions about our routines and visitors. I avoided answering and kept records of every interaction. It felt like living in a constant state of tension and fear. One evening, I confronted the landlord directly with the photos and the knowledge that others had similar experiences. His face flushed with anger, but he quickly masked it with a cold smile. He denied everything and accused me of trying to sabotage him. I stood my ground and warned him I was prepared to take legal action. The police finally conducted a formal search of the building and found numerous fake smoke detectors rigged with cameras and microphones. The landlord was arrested for invasion of privacy and illegal surveillance. It was a relief, but also left me shaken. How many other tenants had suffered in silence? In the weeks after the landlord's arrest, the atmosphere in the building changed dramatically. Tenants felt safer and more united. Their repairs and maintenance improved, and the management was taken over by a reputable company that respected privacy laws. I slowly started to relax again and enjoy my apartment as a true home. I learned a valuable lesson about trusting appearances and standing up for my rights. Living under surveillance had chipped away at my sense of security, but reclaiming my privacy felt like a victory. I connected with neighbors I might never have met otherwise, and together we created a stronger community. It was proof that even in difficult situations, people could find strength in unity. Though the experience left scars, I refused to let fear control my life. I changed the locks on my doors and added my own security measures. I made sure to report anything suspicious and help others who might be vulnerable. What started as a violation turned into a story of resilience and empowerment. Looking back, I am grateful I noticed the detectors and acted before things got worse. I hope my story warns others to be vigilant about their living spaces and never ignore the small signs. Privacy is not just a luxury, it is a fundamental right. No one should live in fear of being watched in their own home. Now, every time I walk into my apartment and see the real smoke detectors, I feel a quiet sense of peace. The silence is no longer unsettling but comforting. I know I am safe here, and that is something I will never take for granted again. Story 12. It was just past noon when I heard the buzzer at the door. I had been working on my laptop, the soft hum of the fan in the background. When I glanced up, I saw a man standing just outside, holding a large package. He was wearing a jacket with a logo I did not recognize, but it looked official enough. I assumed he was a delivery driver. I went to the door and looked through the peephole before opening it. The man smiled and said he had a package for me. I asked what it was for, since I had not ordered anything recently. He hesitated, and then said it was from a company I had never heard of. Something felt off. I told him I needed to see the package before accepting it. He frowned and said it was too heavy to bring to the door. That made me suspicious. Why would a delivery driver not bring the package right to me? Usually they placed items on the doorstep. I kept the door cracked open but did not step outside. I asked for his name and employee number. He gave me a name I did not recognize, and when I asked for a card or ID, he stammered. The hesitation made me uncomfortable. I told him I could not accept the package without proper identification. The man's smile vanished. His voice became sharper as he told me I needed to sign for the package. I said I was not signing anything without proof. Suddenly, he pushed the door a little wider, trying to slip inside. I grabbed the edge of the door and pushed back gently but firmly. But I told him to leave. His tone turned threatening. He said it was just a simple delivery and that I was making things difficult. I told him I had called the delivery company to confirm and that no one was supposed to deliver anything today. He looked angry, then frustrated. At that moment, I stepped back and closed the door quickly. I locked it and bolted the deadbolt. I peered through the peephole and saw him still standing there staring. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. My hands were shaking, but I spoke clearly and gave my address. While waiting for the police, I kept the curtains drawn and checked the locks on every door and window. The man knocked again, harder this time, shouting that I was overreacting. I stayed quiet and did not respond. I knew I had done the right thing. The police arrived within minutes, their lights flashing in the street outside. The man looked around nervously and then ran down the block. The officers took my statement and promised to patrol the area more often. I felt a mix of relief and lingering fear. Later that evening, I sat on my couch with a cup of tea, still processing what had happened. I realized how vulnerable I had felt just moments before. The idea that someone could try to trick me into letting them inside was chilling. It made me appreciate the simple safety of a locked door. I thought about the importance of trusting my instincts. If I had opened the door wider or let him in without question, who knows what might have happened. I learned to never take safety for granted, even during what seems like an ordinary day. Over the next few days, I installed a security camera by the front door. It gave me a little more peace of mind. I also signed up for neighborhood alerts so I could stay informed about any suspicious activity nearby. But I wanted to be prepared, not paranoid. One morning, while checking my phone, I saw a message from a neighbor warning about a man going door to door pretending to be a delivery driver. I forwarded the message to the police and thanked them for their quick response. I felt grateful for the community looking out for one another. Though the experience shook me, it also made me stronger. I became more aware of my surroundings and more confident in setting boundaries. I started carrying a small personal alarm with me and practiced what I would say if someone tried to force their way in again. Weeks later, I ran into one of the officers who helped me that day. We talked about safety tips and how the neighborhood was responding. It felt good to know I was not alone in wanting to keep my home safe. It reminded me that asking for help is a sign of strength. Looking back, I realize how important it is to listen to that quiet voice inside you that warns when something is wrong. It may seem like a small feeling, but it can protect you from danger. I will never ignore it again. The incident changed how I view my home and my safety. I am more cautious but not fearful. I understand that being alert does not mean living in fear. It means respecting yourself enough to protect what matters most. I still feel safe now, surrounded by my small but secure space. I have taken control of my safety, and that gives me peace. I learned that being careful is a form of self-love. In the end, the fake delivery driver did not break through my door, but he left a lasting impression on me. He reminded me to be vigilant, to trust my gut, and to never be afraid to say no. But that lesson is worth more than any package left at my doorstep. Story 13. I never thought I would experience something so disturbing at work. It was an ordinary Wednesday, and the day had been running smoothly until one of the office managers called an emergency meeting. Rumors were already swirling in the hallways before the meeting began. Something serious had happened, and we were all anxious to know what. During the meeting, it was revealed that a coworker had been caught recording women in the office bathroom. The news hit like a thunderclap. The room fell silent as the details were explained carefully by management. They said it had been discovered accidentally by one of the employees when they found a small device hidden near the bathroom entrance. The device was a tiny camera, cleverly concealed to capture footage without detection. It had been recording for weeks, possibly months. Many of the women in the office had no idea they were being watched in such a private and vulnerable space. The violation of privacy was shocking beyond words. After the discovery, management confronted the accused coworker. He denied everything at first, but the evidence was undeniable. Security footage from the hallways showed him entering the area multiple times at suspicious hours. The camera was registered to him, and his phone had footage stored as well. The atmosphere in the office changed overnight. People looked at each other with suspicion and fear. I could see the tension in my coworkers' eyes, especially those who used the bathroom near where the device was found. Some of the women cried openly, feeling violated and unsafe in a place that should have been secure. The company immediately took action to support the victims. They arranged counseling services and set up a hotline for anyone affected. The HR team held multiple sessions explaining the steps being taken to improve security. Cameras were installed in public spaces outside the bathrooms to monitor suspicious behavior without invading privacy. We were asked to report any odd behavior or concerns right away. The trust in the workplace was fragile. Many of us felt guilty for not noticing anything sooner. The thought that someone had been watching us when we were at our most private made me uncomfortable every time I used the restroom. When I looked at the accused coworker after the news broke, he avoided eye contact. His confident demeanor had vanished. He kept to himself, and I noticed how he no longer joined group lunches or casual conversations. His reputation was destroyed within hours, and his presence in the office was a constant reminder of what had happened. I found myself thinking about the women who were affected the most. I tried to imagine their fear and anger. Some of them had worked here for years, and now they felt unsafe in their own workplace. It was clear this was more than just a violation of privacy, it was a betrayal of trust. The company decided to suspend the coworker immediately pending an investigation. The police were involved and the case was taken very seriously. I heard that legal charges were being prepared, including invasion of privacy and harassment. It was reassuring to know the authorities were stepping in to hold them accountable. Even though the situation was handled quickly, the scars remained. Some women requested transfers to other departments or even different branches. Others decided to leave the company altogether. I understood their decisions, Feeling safe at work is not a luxury but a necessity. In the weeks following the incident, the company worked hard to rebuild the sense of security. They organized workshops on workplace safety and respect. Everyone was encouraged to speak up and support each other. The culture slowly began to shift toward one of openness and protection. I realized how important it was to be vigilant, not only for myself but for everyone around me. The experience made me more aware of my surroundings and the people I trusted. I started attending meetings about workplace safety and even volunteered to be part of the new security committee. The whole ordeal was a harsh lesson on how quickly things can change. What once felt like a normal, safe environment turned into a place filled with fear and suspicion. But it also showed me how strong people can be when they come together to face adversity. Eventually, the coworker was officially fired and faced legal consequences for his actions. The company sent out a statement reassuring all employees of their commitment to a safe workplace. They thanked everyone for their courage and patience during a difficult time. For me, the most important part was how we, as a team, supported each other through the healing process. The office slowly returned to a more comfortable place, but we never forgot what had happened. It reminded us all to value respect and dignity in every part of our lives. One afternoon, as I walked to the restroom, I noticed a new sign posted on the door. It reminded us all of our rights to privacy and the importance of reporting any suspicious behavior. Seeing that sign made me feel a little safer. It was a small symbol, but it carried a big message. Looking back, I realized that while the experience was terrifying, it also brought out the best in many people. Courage, empathy, and resilience became the foundation for moving forward. We learned that safety is not just about rules or cameras, but about caring for one another. In the end, the coworkers' actions were a dark chapter in our lives, but they did not define us. We reclaimed our workplace by standing together and demanding respect. The trust was broken but slowly rebuilt, stronger than before. We made sure that no one would ever feel unsafe here again. Story 14. It started with a call that made my heart stop. The voice on the other end was a police officer saying they needed to talk to me about a serious crime. I had no idea what they were referring to, so I asked for details. The officer explained that my face and identification had been used in connection with a robbery. Well, I was stunned and confused. How could someone have used my identity in something so dangerous? I knew I had not been anywhere near the scene. The officer wanted me to come down to the station for questioning and to help clear up the confusion. I agreed immediately, knowing this was something I could not ignore. When I arrived at the station, the room was cold and intimidating. They showed me photos and footage of a person who looked exactly like me, caught on camera during the crime. The same face, the same build, even the same clothing style. It was impossible to deny the resemblance, but I insisted it was not me. They told me the suspect had used my driver's license and social security number. Someone had stolen my identity and was living part of my life while committing crimes in my name. The reality hit me hard. My sense of security shattered in an instant. I had no idea who had done this or why. I spent the next few hours answering questions and giving statements. The officers were polite but firm. They needed to verify my story against all the evidence. I felt trapped in a nightmare where I was both a victim and a suspect. My mind raced, thinking about how deep the identity theft had gone. After the interrogation, I was given advice on what to do next. I had to report the theft to all major agencies, freeze my credit, and watch for any suspicious activity. The officers also suggested hiring a lawyer to protect myself legally. I left the station feeling overwhelmed but determined to fight for my name. Back home, I sat down and started to gather all my documents. Bank statements, identification papers, credit reports. It was a lot to handle, but I was determined to catch the person responsible. I also contacted a private investigator to dig deeper into the situation. I needed answers fast. The private investigator found that someone had applied for multiple loans using my name and address. They had rented a car and even booked a hotel under my identification. Every move was calculated to avoid detection. It was as if they were living a parallel life, using my identity to cover their tracks. One night, I received an anonymous message with a warning. The sender claimed to know who was behind the identity theft and urged me to be careful. I was scared but also grateful for the tip. I passed the information on to the investigator, hoping it would help narrow down the search. Days later, the investigator called me with news. They had located a suspect who matched the description from the crime scene videos. The person had a criminal record and was known for using stolen identities. The suspect was currently in custody for another offense, which made it easier for the authorities to link them to my case. I was relieved but still uneasy. Knowing that the person was caught did not erase the fear that my identity had been compromised so deeply. I cooperated fully with the police, providing all the proof I could to show I was innocent. Slowly, the charges against me were dropped, and my name was cleared. Despite that, the damage lingered. I faced difficulties with credit approvals and background checks. Some friends and colleagues treated me differently, uncertain about the truth. It took months of persistence to restore my reputation. I realized how fragile our identities really are. To protect myself further, I enrolled in identity theft protection services. I changed all my passwords and started monitoring my accounts closely. I became more cautious about sharing personal information online or in public. The experience made me more aware of how vulnerable we all can be. I also found unexpected support from people who had gone through similar situations. Their stories gave me strength and hope. We exchanged advice on how to stay vigilant and recover from identity fraud. It was comforting to know I was not alone in this fight. Gradually, my life returned to normal. The nightmares faded, replaced by a cautious optimism. I rebuilt my credit and resumed my daily routines without constant fear. The lessons I learned stayed with me, a reminder to always protect what is mine. In the end, I understood that identity is more than just documents or photos. It is who I am inside and how I live my life. No matter what someone else tried to do with my face or papers, they could never steal that part of me. I had faced the worst and come out stronger. This experience changed me but did not break me. I grew more careful, more resilient, and more determined. I learned to trust myself again and to stand up for what is right. The person who used my identity to commit crimes is behind bars, and I am finally free to live my life without fear. Story 15. I was desperate for a change when I saw the advertisement for the retreat. It promised peace, clarity, and a fresh start, exactly what I thought I needed after months of feeling lost and overwhelmed. The location was remote, nestled deep in the mountains, far from the noise of the city and my usual worries. I booked a spot without hesitation, telling myself it was a chance to reset and find myself again. The first day was peaceful enough, with guided meditation sessions and group discussions about mindfulness and healing. The people were friendly and welcoming, and the environment felt safe. We were encouraged to let go of our fears and embrace a new way of living. I felt hopeful, and for the first time in a long while, I believed maybe I could find some calm in the chaos of my mind. But as the days passed, things began to shift in ways I did not expect. The schedule grew more rigid, and the leaders started talking about a greater purpose beyond just healing. They spoke of enlightenment and the need to dedicate oneself fully to the group and its teachings. I was told to cut ties with the outside world for the duration of the retreat to focus entirely on my transformation. I thought it was extreme, but I wanted to trust the process. One evening, after a long day of intense group exercises, I realized I had not seen anyone leave the property. I asked one of the facilitators about it, and they smiled warmly but said leaving was not recommended until the retreat was complete. I pressed further, saying I might want to visit my family or just step out for some fresh air. But they gently reminded me the outside world was full of distractions that could harm my progress. I felt uneasy but still tried to convince myself it was for my own good. The meals became more restricted, and we were told to abstain from certain foods and drinks to cleanse our bodies. I started feeling weak and dizzy but was told this was part of the process and to trust the leaders. The daily schedule was packed from dawn until late at night, leaving little room for rest or private time. Any questions or doubts I voiced were met with reassurances that only those truly committed could understand the journey. After a week, I asked if I could leave to check on work and personal matters. The leader's eyes darkened for a moment before he said I was free to leave, but warned that doing so would mean giving up my chance at true enlightenment. The group surrounded me, their expressions a mix of concern and pleading. I began to feel trapped, the friendly smiles replaced by subtle pressure. My phone had been taken away on arrival, and I had no way to contact anyone outside. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself this was temporary and that I could leave once the retreat ended. But each day the rules tightened, and my freedom shrank. I was made to confess past mistakes in front of the group and was told this was necessary to shed old identities. The process felt humiliating and invasive, but I dared not resist openly. I was afraid of what might happen if I did. Late one night, I found a crack in the window screen and tried to climb out quietly. My heart was pounding as I slipped through the narrow opening, but before I could get far, a voice called out behind me. I froze, and the leader appeared with several others. They told me I was not ready to leave, and that my doubts were a test of my commitment. They led me back inside, and I was confined to my room for the rest of the night, left alone with my fears. In the following days, I noticed subtle threats disguised as care. I was told my spirit was weak and needed more sessions to strengthen it. The other members avoided eye contact or whispered behind my back, making me feel isolated and watched. The sense of community I had felt at the beginning turned into suspicion and control. Every move I made was scrutinized. I began to lose track of time, days blending into nights with no clear separation. My body ached from the constant exercises and lack of proper food. My mind was foggy, weighed down by fear and confusion. I realized I was no longer thinking clearly or making decisions for myself. The retreat had become a cage, and I was its prisoner. One afternoon, a new member arrived, and she looked scared and uncertain, just like I had when I first came. I approached her quietly and whispered that I understood what she was feeling. We shared a brief moment of connection before the leader called her away. I wanted to warn her, but knew speaking openly could endanger us both. I promised myself I would find a way out soon. I started paying closer attention to the routines and schedules, looking for weaknesses or patterns. I learned when the guards were less vigilant and which paths were less watched. I found a small tool in my room that I could use to pry open a window more easily. Each night I planned my escape, knowing I had to be careful and patient. The risk was too great to act hastily. One morning, during a group activity, I slipped away unnoticed and headed for the area I had identified. My heart was racing as I moved quietly through the grounds, avoiding cameras and patrols. When I reached the edge of the property, I found the fence was surprisingly low in one spot. I climbed over and ran without looking back. The air